Okay, great, fantastic. So let's start with my first question, which is about your qualifications. So could you just tell me something about your qualifications?
Yes, I did my teacher training to be an English language teacher about 11 years ago in Norwich at Norwich Institute of Language Education. So that was March 2009. That was the CELTA. So I did the 4-week CELTA course. And then 3 years later, I did a master's and MA in English language teaching at the University of Warwick.
And why did you decide to be an ELT teacher?
Well, originally, going back to before my teacher training and my CELTA course, I spent 3 months volunteering overseas in Tanzania, in Africa. And I came back thinking, I'd quite like to do something else that involves me traveling and maybe teaching. So I went to South Korea with no qualifications at all and spent a year with young learners at a after-school club, a Hagwon in South Korea. I subsequently came back from South Korea and then did the CELTA in 2009. So it was a chance to travel the world and to see a bit of the world and to experience new cultures and cuisines and languages.
And what happened after 2009? What is your teaching background after that?
Well, after that, I got qualified and I continued to work, first of all, in a young learner activities like teenagers activity course in summer course in Cambridge at the Leeds School in Cambridge, and that was a lot of fun. It was a 6 weeks course, and out of that came the opportunity to work in Beijing in China. So I subsequently went to Beijing in the latter part of 2009 and spent 10 months in Beijing. I've subsequently worked in a variety of different contexts and countries, including Saudi Arabia, Vietnam, and back in China again.
So you worked in many different contexts, but also in the ESOL context in the UK, right?
Yes, the ESOL has been more recent because I had some problems with my mental health around 2014 through to 2016, on and off. So I wasn't in full-time employment during these years. But in 2016, I came back into teaching as a volunteer for a mental health charity, Mind, in the UK. This was also in Norwich, where I now live. And out of that, it was like a stepping stone, and that was low-level English learners. So this was my first hand of really low-level learners English for refugees, migrant workers living in Norwich. So I started off voluntarily, and then 6 months later, worked for an organisation called New Roots, which is a Norwich-based charity. They're about integrating people who have come from other countries, fled from other countries, and have settled in the UK, in Norwich, the city of Norwich. And they're there to support them, help them with all sorts of issues, health issues, claims for government support, work experiences, and English language. And so for about 5 or 6 months, I was an on and off English language tutor for low-level refugees, migrant workers in Norwich. And yeah, so out of that, I then subsequently got work for a local authority, Norfolk County Council, to teach a specific course, which was an ESOL course. And I'm still an ESOL tutor. In fact, even today, I've been doing work as an ESOL tutor, trying to contact my learners.
Okay, so if you could compare the ESOL context to the other contexts that you work at or in, what would be the differences and the similarities?
The similarities would be a wide variety of people from different backgrounds. So if I compare to, say, the summer activity courses, people from students and learners from lots of different countries and cultures and backgrounds. Also similarities in terms of groups of classes, so mixed ability and mixed ability and mixture of ages as well. But there's a lot of differences too. So differences in terms of a lot of the teaching I've done abroad has been with one homogeneous group. So if I was in Vietnam, it was all Vietnamese people. If I was in China, it was all Chinese, etc., etc. So the only similarity is when I've worked in Cambridge on the young learner courses, the teenagers courses, but the differences are the lower levels. So most of my experience has been with what I would call pre-sessional or preparatory year students wanting to go to university. And even a lot of my private students have been wanting to go to university or at university wanting to do a master's, so a high level. But with ESOL, within the last 3 years, it's been a case of really paring down my language and thinking a lot more about input and pacing of lessons, and need as well. So the thing with the ESOL classes compared to say other classes is they're often not paying for the course. There's no money exchanged hands. It's funded. Therefore, that has a knock-on effect with things like attendance, which we might come on to, and just motivation, really, and ability.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of attendance, well, when you don't pay for a course, you're intrinsically less likely to turn up for class. You don't feel, you might want to study English or you might want to study the subject, but if you're not paying for something, you are less inclined to attend on a regular basis. You might turn up for the first 2 or 3 sessions and then you kind of come and go. And although I have to keep an attendance and an e-register and update that regularly, and it's important, attendance is important as in any institution, I just find it's harder to keep tabs on my learners and to keep them motivated, I think, to come to class. Even though they want to, they just don't feel as motivated because they're not paying for it.
Okay, so would you say that the biggest challenges of the ESOL context are motivation, attendance, and...
I think the biggest challenge over and above everything else is attendance. So they might want to do it, but family gets in. I say life gets in the way. So I wrote a blog post about exactly this last year, and I can share that with you. It's about life getting in the way. So the students in ESOL classes tend to be adults. They're not always younger adults. They're often middle-aged adults from a wide variety of backgrounds, and they have husbands or wives, they have children, and they have healthcare issues and lots of other pressing life things that get in the way of them coming to class. And even during a class, their phone will ring and they've got an appointment, or they don't come because I have appointment, and they're not always able to, because their English is low level, they're not always able to communicate effectively why they're not there or why they're not coming. They just don't tell you half the time.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't have those problems in different contexts?
No, in other contexts, the differences in all other contexts is that the students, the learners have paid, or their parents have paid, usually parents, if they're teenagers or young learners. And also they are in a culture such as Korea or China, where it's very, very important to have education. So not only is money being exchanged hand, so they turn up. Whether it's extrinsic or intrinsic motivation depends on the individual. Generally, it's extrinsically motivated because it's usually parents saying you must attend, or their motivation is high because they paid for a course. Whereas with ESOL, it's local, it's a mixed group. They would like to, with adult learning in general, they would like to complete the course. They would like to move on to the next stage or pass an exam, but it's not their biggest thing that they're doing in their life. They have other things that are more pressing, and quite often with a lot of the contexts and situations I've taught, it's intensive, that they are studying 9 to 5, 6 to 7 days a week, or 5 days, 6 days a week, and they are all geared up to going to study in the UK full time. Whereas ESOL, it's much more kind of drop in, drop out, attendance is patchy. Motivation, it's kind of there, but it's not as they're not as highly motivated as say learners in other contexts and cultures, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that ESOL classes are mixed ability classes?
Oh, always. I mean, with my employer, they will stream learners into one of 3 levels, but we have, in ESOL terms, we have entry level 1, we have entry level 2. Then we have level 1, level 2, and so on. So entry level 1, entry level 2, and entry level 3, I'm sorry, and then level 1 and level 2. And level 2 is the kind of the equivalent of what a 16-year-old would study at GCSE level in the UK. Entry level 1 is very low level. I mean, there is lower than that. There's level 0 or complete beginner, which you have in any context. You will have a complete beginner, or a false starter, as they say, false beginner. And then entry 1 is not much higher than that. You know, basic name, basic details, not very good at writing, maybe a bit of spoken English, but very poor spoken English, but writing ability and reading ability very low indeed. So in terms of levels, yeah, I've never taught anything higher than I would say entry 2, entry 3, probably the highest. And they are mixed within that. So even if you stream a class and I teach a particular course which is called English for Driving Theory, so they're learning something quite specific. But in that there are people that have very low level ability to communicate, and there is others who are very, very competent and can understand, and so they go at very, very different speeds. So I have a group of say 10 to 12 learners, and they're going at completely different speeds.
So the speed of learning and also different levels of English in one group.
Yeah, so speed that they go at is matched, I think, with their ability. So if they are of a higher ability within that group, then they're racing ahead. If they are of lower ability in comparison with other students in that group, they need a lot more support.
And are there any other differences between the learners within one group?
Sometimes if they've come from a certain country or culture, they may not want to work with other types of students or from other cultures. They tend to different from, say, students wanting to go to university, they're less likely to mix. But they might, but there could be issues in terms of, and you don't always know it. You don't always know why they don't really want to work with a particular student. And sometimes it's just purely their low-level English plus kind of their perception of another learner in the class from another country is that, well, they're not my compatriot. They're not from the same area. They don't speak this. They don't have the same first language. So the Arabic speakers might help each other out, or the 2 Iraqi students might help each other out, or the 2 Syrians might help each other out. But I'm always trying to kind of mix it up. And sometimes the classic techniques of putting a learner that doesn't have the same first language as another learner is that you do that, you try it, but it doesn't always work or achieve results because they are more comfortable with working with someone with the same first language, or even coming from the same country.
So you started telling me about different strategies that you used in your lessons. Could you tell me about any other strategies that you use in mixed ability classes?
Well, differentiation plays a big role, and I think you might well ask me about differentiation in a minute, but I was never particularly good up until I taught ESOL classes about differentiation. I did it, but I didn't really consciously do or employ differentiation. But since I've been an ESOL teacher, with a wide variety of abilities within a streamed class, is I find, and I mean, it's very, very it's a good analogy. I teach English for Driving Theory, so they're all trying to pass the driving theory test in the United Kingdom. And so I used that metaphor of driving a car to talk about my learners' speeds. So if someone might be going at 40, 50 miles an hour or kilometers an hour, you know, racing ahead and doing all the work quickly and finishing quickly. And then I've got another working at 20 or 30 miles an hour. And then I've got someone in the slow lane or on the hard shoulder. They've either broken down or they're going at 5 miles, 10 miles an hour. So I use that a lot as a way to describe and to differentiate. So I have a traffic light system. So when I set homework, everyone does the red light on the traffic light. You all can do that. That's the minimum. Then amber light in the middle is for, you know, if you can do this, you've got time. And then green is for the faster learners. So I stage the homework and I differentiate everything. And in terms of monitoring, so I'll have to monitor the lower ability students more. And I have to give them the time. So I don't race ahead. And I always have learners who are finishing first, and I give them additional tasks or additional questions. and then I go round and make sure that everyone has finished before we check on answers.
Can I ask you about the traffic light system? What if all of them just say, okay, we are going to do the red light task, and they refuse to do, amber and green? How do you motivate them?
That's a good question. I mean, I do the traffic light system for homework. So they then have 7 days, or they did have 7 days before the class was suspended, to do either just the red thing, which everyone is supposed to do, or the other levels. Now, depending on how autonomous the learner is, and if you are motivated, you tend to have, autonomous learners tend to be more motivated. Motivated learners tend to be more autonomous. The two go together. The ones that need less support will race ahead and they will do the other things that they're being asked to do if life doesn't get in the way. But for the most part, another factor about ESOL classes, and this is something that's been even more true since lessons have stopped or been suspended, the face-to-face lessons, is that they only really want to learn when they're in the classroom with you. They're not so good at learning off their own back, on their own. There are I have had some learners who are already doing very well with learning the driving theory, and they are motivated because they really, really want to pass their driving test. So they will do the extra work. So you can almost measure it, how good the learner is, how autonomous the learner is, depending on how motivated they are to pass their driving test. Okay. So I can't ever force them to do the amber and the green parts, but I encourage them to do so, and some of them do. Mm-hmm. But most of them come back the next week and say, yeah, I did that bit, I finished that task, and then that's enough, and I wait for the next lesson.
I just wanted to ask, so motivation influences the autonomy or the other way around?
I think motivation and autonomy go together. So you can be an autonomous learner, you can be self-reliant, you can study at home, okay, and not need the teacher with you. So that's autonomy, being able to do it by yourself. And I often think that you can't just be autonomous, you have to also be motivated so if you want to pass the driving theory test by June, you will be motivated when you're on your own and self-study. And even today I've just been ringing up learners, and some of them haven't done anything, and some of them have been watching my videos and have been studying with the books. They're motivated when they get the time. It comes that I go back to what I said earlier. They want to do it, they want to learn, and they want to pass the driving test, but life gets in the way and they don't always have the time. And given other challenges that were going on currently, even though that they are home, the children are at home all of the time, and all of my learners have at least one child. So that always takes first priority, is childcare. So those that are autonomous and more motivated tend to do the work when they can, when the children are either in bed or otherwise occupied.
Okay, so in the ESOL context, how many students, what's the percentage of autonomous and motivated learners, in your opinion?
My class, this is the third time now. I'm halfway through teaching this driving theory course for the third time. And there's always been a mixture. So if there's a class of 12, there's always been a mixture of those that are just racing ahead, very, very capable. I hardly need to do anything. I'm just kind of pushing them in the right direction, and they will pass their real driving theory test by the end of the course or just afterwards. Then there's a kind of middle band of they have to do the work, and if they put all the effort in and they come to the classes every week and they do the work, then they also can pass their real theory test when the time comes. And then you've got the hangers-on, the stragglers, the slower ones, and they're the ones I say metaphorically, they're the ones in the slow lane or the hard shoulder, kind of broken down, don't always attend classes. Even if they do attend classes, they're just starting from a very low point and they don't put the effort in. So they're already low, they don't put the effort in. They might want to pass, but they're not as motivated as some of the others, or they don't feel as capable as some of the others. And sometimes they get left behind. Now, it's my job as a teacher not to make sure that they're left behind. But often with ESOL classes, if your perception as a learner is, oh, I'm the weakest student in this class, I'm not, I'm one of the slower learners, then you might lose motivation. You might get put off, and then what happens is that learner starts not coming to class, and then they just disappear off the register because they feel, and they never tell you this, they wouldn't say this to you, they would just not appear, because that could be cultural things, they could be a lack of pride, they don't want to feel like in the class that they are the slowest learner, so they might be embarrassed, or they just feel, or they just give up. And obviously as a teacher, that's not, I'm concerned if that happens, but sometimes it's inevitable based upon how they perceive their position and their ability within the class, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And you told me about differentiation before. And on a scale from 1 to 5, how would you rate your differentiation skills?
They've got better. I didn't always used to be good at differentiation. So I say differentiation when you've got all Chinese students or all Saudi students who are similar in ability and similar in terms of their own motivation. Differentiation wasn't so important then because they were all roughly the same levels and the same ages. But with ESOL classes, it's come right into the fore. So again, I've written a blog post about why you have to include differentiation and how you can improve differentiation and what skills and what techniques you can do to do this. So obviously for more able learners, for faster learners, you give them additional tasks, you give them more challenging texts, you ask them to do things without the books. Whereas with lower levels, you need scaffolding, you need to repeat instructions, you need to use concept checking questions, good classic English teaching techniques to make sure that they are on task, and then you monitor. So you monitor more closely, but not too closely. I'm a big fan of peer correction. I'm a big fan of the teacher standing back and letting classmates correct and help each other. And that tends to happen organically. You don't always have to force people to work together. It kind of just happens kind of organically. So I have got better at differentiation. And I think if I'm going to be inclusive of all my learners, then differentiation is absolutely essential in an ESOL class.
Mm-hmm. So how would you rate yourself from 1 to 5?
3, maybe 4. I wouldn't say I'm brilliant. I'd say 3 or 4.
Have you ever had any training on that?
I've not specific training on differentiation. I probably have been to a couple of adult learning tutor meetings where we've talked about differentiation. I'm sure I've attended some continuous professional development on this topic, but I've also learned a lot from a Twitter thing called ELT Chat, #ELT Chat, which was we used to meet once a week on a Wednesday, and one of the topics was differentiation. Another one was on adult learners. What's the problem with adult learners? And I wrote the summary for both those topics, for differentiation, differentiation strategies, and the one on adult learners. And they came within a month of each other. It's about a year ago, and I was doing this class then. So it's very pertinent and topical and relevant for what I did.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've got 2 more questions for you.
Okay.
Hello.
We're back.
Yeah. So do you want me to repeat my question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you recording?
Again, yeah.
Okay, great.
So I just wanted to know why you have different levels within one group. Why are they not divided differently? Like pre-entry 1 or pre-entry in one group, entry 1 in one group, level 1 in this group. Why is that the case?
Because there is only one driving theory class. There's not like loads and loads of learners wanting to do the class. It starts off at the beginning of the course with about 24 people wanting to do the class. Mm-hmm. I always cap it at 12 because I think 12 is a manageable number, and I have a reserve list. And the reason for it being lots of different levels is because there's only one class. It's not like there's 3 classes and you can go, okay, level 1, level 2, level 3. They always have to be of a minimum of, I say entry level 2, although I have them a bit lower than that. If you have a couple that are not quite entry 2 or haven't passed the entry level 2 City and Guilds exam, for example, in the UK, then that's manageable. but the majority have to be entry level 2 or higher to do this particular course because of the amount of vocabulary that they have to learn. And it's not a grammar course. We don't even look at grammar. They do some writing, but it's not about correcting their present perfect tense. It's about vocabulary and it's about comprehension, understanding written questions, because that's what the test is like, and also understanding visual clues, because that's what the test is like. So it's not a test of their grammar, but the point about that is there's only one class, so I have to accommodate not the huge variety of abilities, but the significant differences in ability. But it's not just English ability, it's just all-round communicative ability of the learners as well.
Okay, I see. Thank you for your answer. And my final question, what do you enjoy about teaching ESOL?
It's rewarding. It's not my favourite thing to do. I prefer English for academic purposes when I'm at university. I think that is always going to be my preference.
And can I ask
but
why?
Why? Because there are so many more skills that I need to draw on, and experience that I need to draw on as a teacher to teach ESOL class, because it's lower level, because life gets in the way. It's not so much the lower level, because I can do that. I can pare my language down. It's more to do with things like attendance and just excuses and just all other things that just get in the way of the learning. So it's frustrating. However, it can be rewarding, and I've taught 2 of these classes now, and I'm about to finish, or coming towards finishing a 3rd one, which I will be posting a blog post about it on the 14th of April, next Tuesday. And the thing about that is I have people that pass the tests. They do the course and they pass their real driving theory test. And as far as I know, at least 4 of my learners have gone on to drive a car legally in this country, having passed their theory test. Because the theory test is the hard part. Most of them can drive a car or have enough knowledge to drive a car, so they can do the practical. It's the English that they need to pass the theory before they can do the practical test. So it's rewarding, and I get results.
Great, fantastic. And I don't have any more questions. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, there's nothing I'd like to add, not at all. Obviously, you're going to anonymise all the answers, so there's no point me telling you more about what I've written, because I think
In which 2 places must you not park?
Near a school entrance. Near a police station. In a side road. At a bus stop. In a one-way street.